Hello, everyone, and Ivana Taylor here, your host for Bizapalooza Chat this Monday. I'd like to welcome all of you, and I want to especially welcome our special sponsor for this week, which is Beautiful.ai. You can see them on Twitter, Beautiful AI_. And they are with us here today to talk about how to tell stories with data, because one of the things that's most important, how many times have we been in presentations and meetings where people throw charts up on the board, nobody knows what's going on, you're sitting there doing the math in your head, there has to be a better way, and at the end there's a decision to be made ultimately. And too often, one of the last things you want to see is CEOs and VPs raising their hand, questioning your data, questioning your results, and ultimately questioning your proposal. We don't want that. And for that, our friends at Beautiful AI are going to help us tell stories with data. So let me introduce you. I'm going to, oh my word. Where is my video? Ask to start video. You guys disappeared.
We see you.
There we are. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I don't know how I did that. Alrighty. Spotlight video, not start video. Anyway, welcome, welcome. Mitch DeGrasso and Lou. Nice to meet you here. Thank you so much for being here. Talk a little bit about Beautiful AI, because I know that the design of this particular platform has a lot to do with some personal passions and peeves that you guys have.
Yeah, definitely. And thanks for having us. Well, you know, the story of Beautiful AI is kind of goes back a few years. I had a previous startup that I built a product called SlideRocket, which was an online presentation tool. It was one of the first tools to do collaboration and sharing and analytics and all that stuff. But you know, at its heart, it was an authoring tool. It was a design tool, just like PowerPoint. I come from a design background, and I wanted to build a tool that really worked for me. And while we were ultimately pretty successful, I found that the presentations that people were creating with the tool were still kind of ugly, kind of hard to follow, didn't really follow best practices of design. And we spent a lot of time trying to figure out, how could we make this easier for people? How could we make everyone be a great designer? And we started by trying to build templates. So you know, this is something you can do today. You can download all these templates and for PowerPoint, and stick them in your presentation and fill in the information. But the challenge was always, the example I always like to give is, you know, you download one of those slides that has 3 team members or three people and their little bio under each one. And that works great if you've got 3 team members, but if you've got 4 or 5 or 6, suddenly you're back into authoring, you're dragging stuff around, you're moving boxes and doing alignments and changing font size, and that's where stuff breaks down. So a few years ago, when I started building a new startup, when I started doing Beautiful AI, I thought to myself, well, how could I make that a lot easier? How could I automate that experience? And could we use sort of artificial intelligence technologies to sort of do the design for you and take away the need for the user of the product to be the expert at design, and let the product itself be the expert, and let the user focus on telling a story, because that's ultimately what a presentation is for. I mean, you're trying to do a pitch, you're trying to tell a story, you're trying to convince someone of your point of view, or whatever it may be. You're trying to report on information, and that's what's important. That's what most likely you as the presenter are an expert at. You're not necessarily an expert at design. So why not let the tool become the expert? And a lot of that flowed over into what we're going to talk about today, is data visualization, because you know, one of the biggest problems in presentations today is it's hard to do visualization. It's hard to, you know, come up with a a good way to tell your story visually, especially when it's data. And so we fall back on things like charts and bullet points, of course, and just a lot of text, because we don't have the time to put in the effort and the work to visually design something interesting. But ultimately, that's a lot more compelling to the presentee, to the people you're talking to see your information visually. And so Beautiful AI ultimately became a tool to build these smart templates and help you visualize your story in a very creative and design-centric way.
That's such a great point. What, based on, because I know, Lou, you're a designer as well, so I'm kind of curious to hear the conversation between the two of you. People do present data poorly, and every time it's almost like we are programmed that, like, for example, if you throw a table up there, or,
well,
you know.
Exactly, but, you know, I've spent a lot of time in consulting and having had to design a lot of this stuff. As a non-designer, this was the bane of my existence, having to be forced to get out of the mindset of telling the story, helping people understand what I've come to understand about the underlying facts and make it something attractive, which is why, you know, working with Mitch on this project was like so exciting to me, because it's unleashing and allowing me to go beyond my individual capabilities. I mean, I have a sense of design, but, you know, manifesting.
No, he's the worst. His presentations are black and white with lots of bullet points.
Well, not anymore. Not anymore.
Well, here's the thing, because it is at least the challenge that I found is that there's absolutely no lack of beautiful ways to present data. But what I'm really curious about from you guys is this idea of data visualization and telling the story with data. And to me, that means knowing what chart goes to what you want to communicate. So either, you know, Mitch or Lou, maybe Mitch, you want to talk about that, whichever one wants to jump in.
What this tool that we tried to build does is lets you think about the intent of your what point you're trying to make, and then presents you a bunch of different ways to do that. So you might want to show growth, you might want to show comparison, you might want to show time, you might want to show process, you might want to show data, you know, the raw data. There's lots of different ways, but to visualize that information, and then the tool will present to you a bunch of different templates that you can use to fill in that information. Does all the heavy lifting for you of how does that look, and make sure it looks good, make it easy to change that information, but lets you sort of pick, you know, exactly how you want to visualize it. Because we're not quite smart enough just yet to give you the ultimate way that you want to present any given sort of data point, but we can give you a lot of different options to choose from and make them really easy to work with, and then guarantee they're always going to look good. It's much easier if you're actually using the tool to sort of experience what we're talking about. It's a very different experience than using PowerPoint, where PowerPoint gives you this blank canvas where it's up to you to figure out what you're going to build. I mean, you can use smart art in some cases, you can use charts, and those are all great. But this gives you a more holistic, you know, what kind of slide am I creating? What is the data I want to represent, and how should it be represented?
So how do you get around that? You know, I didn't ask the big question, which is, what is the biggest challenge with presenting data? I guess I sort of shared mine, right? I kind of have an idea, you know, like we might know I want to show growth, or we might, I don't know. I think we're just lazy thinkers. What have you found is the biggest challenge for folks when they're trying to present data visually?
Well, I mean, Lou likes to talk about, you know, you don't want to dump all of your data. You want your data to tell a story. You are trying to make a point, and throwing up, unless you're talking about like the last 12 months of revenue or growth or whatever it is, you know, your chart is going to be, it's kind of like, it's too easy to just fall back on the data dump of just throwing everything up there, which, you know, you're leaving it up to your audience to interpret what you're trying to tell them. But you want to be making your point. In most cases, I mean, there's obviously cases where you do want to show a lot of data. But often you're trying to show something specific, you know, whatever your headline is on the slide, you know, our growth was up 50% year over year, or 7,000 users joined in the last week. I mean, this is what's important, not how many users joined 6 months ago necessarily, unless you're trying to show the change, and then you're trying to show change. So there's just ways to visualize data that really emphasizes your point and not requiring you to just sort of dump it all and let the user interpret it.
I'm right there with you. I want to jump to you, Lou, because this was a conversation that you and I had earlier, right? Because typically the headline you see on a PowerPoint presentation is user growth over the last 6 months.
Exactly, right.
And the storytelling one wouldn't go that way. So I get that the number one point is know what point you want to make, but say more about that in the storytelling realm of your data.
Well, that's, to me, that's been the most interesting thing about really digging into, presentations as a medium and working on Beautiful AI and this experience that we're creating that's trying to mimic the experience of working with an actual human designer. And to me, the thing that always sort of was my, big aha working with an actual designer isn't that they could make pretty things, because that's what I expected. The real value from working with a designer, a good designer, was that when I tell them what I'm trying to communicate and we're talking about my story, they'd say, so instead of showing that revenue chart where I've got 12 months of data, you're trying to talk about the 63% growth over the year. Is the actual underlying data important, or is it that 63%? And you find that in most cases, it's the 63%. So why isn't that front and center, nice and big, nice and clear for the audience to say, this is what we're talking about, 63% growth, since last year. That's the story. They're not, because if we put up the entire chart, what we're sort of forcing the audience to do is interpret that chart. We're asking them to look at all the data points, make their own assumptions. They may make assumptions that aren't what I'm trying to tell in my story. So lots of times, less is more, and it's hard for non-design professionals to always latch onto that, which is why what Mitch was talking about having an intent-driven system where you say, I want to represent growth, and it sort of, much like the designer does, it surfaces these options for doing it. That's the fantastic part to me, is that, finding new ways to tell my story with, these visualizations that are crisp and clear and right to the point.
I want to dig into the storytelling part just a little bit, because I have been guilty of doing this. I know lots of folks in our audience have been guilty of doing this, and that is you get the quote unquote assignment, the milestone of that there's going to be a presentation of some sort. You're going to have to present data. And I can't recall how many times I've actually taken the time to understand what the story is behind the data. So if you don't mind, I want to sort of step it back a little bit, because I think what you said is really important. You knew what point you wanted to make. Quite frankly, I think a lot of folks don't know what point they want to make.
Yeah.
Can we talk about that? Like, how do you figure out, how do you get, because the only way I know, and can we just say it takes time, right?
It takes time. And that's, again, what's important about the product that we're building. We're giving you that time. PowerPoint takes that time away from you, because you spend your time not only trying to figure out what am I trying to say, but how am I going to say it? Like, how am I going to visualize this? Oh my God, it's a timeline. I don't want to build a timeline. That's going to take me forever. This tool takes away all that pain and makes it really quickly. You say, you want to show time? Okay, let me try it out. And you don't have to, you can really experiment with how you want to tell your story. I mean, our tagline for a while was, you tell your story, we'll make it beautiful. The point of that is that, we let you spend, we're not necessarily saying that it'll take less time to build a presentation, but if you think about, I guess I wish we had the tool. We'd build you a little, slice chart that showed the amount of time that you spend, doing your story and an amount of time you spend actually executing. That gets really shrunk down into a almost negligent amount of time. So you can spend your time thinking about, how do I want to best represent this? Changing the way the data is shown. It's very easy to switch between different variations. I want to show this as a series of bubbles representing different size, or maybe I want to show it as a pictograph, or maybe I want to show it as a bunch of bars or radial charts. You can just switch your data instantly between that, or your visualization instantly between it, carrying your data over. I think of the world, this is sort of, I've always sort of espoused this, that there's, what is my story? How am I going to represent that story visually, and then the act of actually presenting it? And to be honest, right now, Beautiful AI is firmly focused in the middle, helping you visualize that story, but ultimately will expand out to helping you tell that story as well as and craft it too.
That's so good to hear. One of the first questions we asked on the chat today is, when you hear the word data, what is it that comes to mind? And folks are saying, I hope it makes me think of analysis. I hope that it's useful and makes sense, as opposed to numbers for numbers' sake.
Right.
And I think
and so
separating the wheat from the chaff, those kinds of phrases. So when people think about data visualization, they are craving for sense.
And so we even, we acknowledge there are times when you want to do charts, there's times when you want to do tables and just show a lot of data. But even then, there's ways to tease out of those charts things like emphasis or highlighting points or adding annotations and things that can, are difficult to do in PowerPoint. It's hard to customize a chart. It's hard to make it look good other than what, Microsoft has sort of given you. We're giving you tools that, really allow you, again, to tell that story, and maybe you want to show change in value between 2 points. And so you can really sort of still have that chart be there and still have all that data, but really tease out the highlights and to help you tell that story.
Absolutely. So I do want to ask the question because, we just talked about that it does take a little bit of work, take some thinking, take some time of getting your hands dirty with the data is what I like to say. But is it worth it, you guys? What impact does having a really great visual presentation have on, your level of persuasion?
It's huge. I mean, we know this as people on the other side. I mean, we immediately are influenced both intellectually and emotionally by what we're seeing in the presentation. And if it doesn't look good, we're immediately somewhat dismissive, and the converse is true too. But I just want to back up just a step, because the thing that's always going to be the biggest swing, though, is making sure that you've got your audience in mind and that your story is fulfilling the mission of what you're trying to do. And it's really hard, because when you talk about presentations, they all kind of get lumped up and all together in one blob, but they're very different things. I mean, sometimes, even talking about data viz, when we were thinking about the questions prior to this, one of the things is like, you typically don't want to dump raw data, but sometimes you're in a briefing situation, and that's exactly what you need to do, because your audience is expecting data at a low level that they wish to interpret. However, most of the time, and this is, I think, the critical thing that a lot of people either miss or sort of, don't follow through on it completely, is that if you're standing up in front of an audience, even if it's a small audience, and you're presenting because you've been tasked to present a case or an analysis or some thesis or on how to move forward, something that's of value to the business. I mean, just to put it really simply. And a lot of times you get this mixed thing where, and again, I'm totally guilty of this from my consulting days, where I deliver a presentation where I felt that I had to sort of show my work, like to the teacher at school. It's like, here's the answer, but here's all my work too. And the reality is, in a presentation where you're stand-up presenting, you really want to talk about your answer and why, and not be showing your work for all the world to see. And it's not to say that you couldn't have a handout or something else backing it up, but you want nice, clean, compelling statements in front of people that they can absorb. If they're attractive graphically, they're more likely to lend them more credibility and absorb them a little easier. And That's really what it's all about. Again, it does go back to this thing about the story. You really can't compromise on taking the time to craft the story you're trying to tell, which should be in line with your business agenda of why you're presenting in the first place and what your audience is expecting to hear or see.
And then given that, again, creating beautiful presentations is hard work. Presenting is hard work. It's a stressful sort of thing, you know, standing up in front of people and communicating your ideas to them it's hard work. A lot of people feel very uncomfortable. And the last thing you want to be doing is feeling insecure about, you know, the content that you're using, you know, your presentation. You don't want to be making excuses. There was I think Mitt Romney just a couple weeks ago or last week was doing a presentation, and, you know, he's like, oh, making excuses. If that text was bigger, you could read it. And that's the last thing you want to be worrying about when you're up there trying to flow through your story. And so that was a big part of this tool, was to, you know, make you feel comfortable and confident that the story you're presenting is represented in a clean, efficient design.
I have to say, as someone who has used the platform, which I thought was really fun, I actually did my media kit that used to be on Google Slides, and I ended up doing it in beautiful AI. And there is, like anything else, a little bit of a transition. And one of the things that I found both frustrating and at the very same time, I was grateful for it. It's as if it will not let you create a bad slide. Like, if it doesn't work, it is not meant to work. It's almost like the system says, no, your font shall not be teeny tiny.
Yeah, so that's been that's been a big challenge. You know, we call that design best practices. And ultimately, that's what enabled this product to exist, is that there are tons of best practices that are, you know, incontrovertible out there. You know, don't put a lot of text on your slide. Keep the points simple. You know, don't use bad images. You know, don't make the font too small. I mean, there's dozens of them, and we've encoded all that stuff into the product, so the, you know, the design AI knows about that, and it's opinionated. It will enforce those things, and that's how we can sort of guarantee that your presentation will look good, is by not letting you kind of go off the rails. Whereas other tools will just sort of say, just here's your blank canvas, give me whatever you want. That's not the way this tool works. And I will acknowledge that, you know, we launched this about 2 weeks ago, and, you know, we're getting tons and tons of great feedback, but certainly the number one is, how do I change the font size? And you don't, you know, and the answer, the question, I always re-answer that question with, why do you want to change the font size? I mean, if it's, I mean, this was the thing that I sort of realized, that, you know, there's design and then there's sort of art or aesthetics. And design is about communicating something in a way that people can comprehend it. Everything else is almost aesthetics, the flourishes, the details. And that stuff is important, but it's maybe not as important as communicating effectively. And, you know, one of the things that happens with this product is that, you know, a timeline is a timeline, and it becomes a sort of a comparison chart, or a whatever visualization you have. You know, you're given ways to sort of influence them with your style. You can add your branding, your colors. You can decide you want thick lines or thin lines or squares or circles, and it'll do that stuff. But you can't go everywhere you want to go. You can't, you know, you're limited in your options. And I really think that's okay, because at the end of the day, you're not creating an art piece. You're creating a communication medium that should be effective. And that's what it's designed to do.
I have to tell you that, you know, as you're speaking, we're running a Twitter chat, and it's like Twitter. Twitter had 140 characters.
Right.
Figure it out, right? Figure it out. And what I really encourage everyone to use this platform, because if you love Twitter, you would love Beautiful AI, because it has that same type of essence to it, which is, okay, this, what I'm doing is not working. How else can I say this? How else can I communicate this? And I went from like frustration, because remember, we're used to working inside of a certain context, which is PowerPoint or Google or whatever. And like Lou was saying, when you have to make that shift, you need to make a contextual shift, right? And what this platform does, it says our context is clear and direct communication through visuals.
Right. So imagine you had a designer working by your side, and you said to the designer, I've got 17 bullet points I want to put on the slide. The designer would be like, dude, I mean, like, can we trim that down? Can we put it on multiple slides? And you would have this interactive sort of conversation with the designer. That's what we're trying to experience. We're trying to give you that this tool is like your designer, your own personal designer in a box. And, he can be a little bit of a pain in the ass sometimes. He can, lock it down and sort of limit you. But at the end of the day, we think you'll create a more effective, better presentation if you follow those rules. Now, it's early days for us, and we're continually adjusting and adapting to, what the users want to see, and we'll get better and better. And we'll also get to the point where, we'll help you, perhaps summarize your text or understand the context of what you're saying and figure out better ways to do that. We'll get there.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So let's kind of dig in a little bit more. And I want to get back to storytelling. I think a lot of the questions that we're talking about today, there is no doubt that there is a tool to represent, and there is some way to represent whatever your story is. But I keep coming back to the part, maybe Lou, this is your forte here, to help people parse out. Let's kind of like break it down and into the little teeny tiny pieces parts, right? Let's pretend that you are doing a presentation and like you want funding, or you have an idea and you want to get your budget increased, or you want whatever. How can we help our audience to break that story down? Because clearly the tools are there to make it happen. But I think where I can tell you, even though I had stuff that I sort of knew what the story was, I still struggled. And I think I still made some ugly, right? So I still have some work to do. But I think it has to do let's teach our audience how to parse that conversation down into an effective story. Is there not a template, but yeah, is there a formula or a template that you like to use when you are creating a story for a presentation?
Absolutely, and it's not it's not anything mysterious or proprietary. I mean, in fact, much as Mitch was saying that there's kind of this corpus of best practices around visual design for presentations, there's really sort of a clear understanding and agreement, amongst professionals as to, how you go about telling your story as well. And then it's sort of what I said a little bit earlier, that, the core of it, when we talk about the word effective, right, the core of that meaning is that you have inspired the intended action, that what you wanted to have happen happened, right? That's effective. So really your storytelling has to back up from there, and you have to figure out for your given audience and the information you have, how are you going to get them to take the action you want? I mean, and it has nothing to do with the visuals at first. And I think that's really the key. Again, I know from firsthand, I'd often get tripped up because I know that, I would have to make a presentation, at 2:00 in the afternoon on Tuesday afternoon. So I knew that I had to have these visuals in place to stand up and present, and that can be very distracting. The key, it wound up, and I discovered this long before I even got involved with Beautiful AI, it always wound up, the best presentations I gave are when I spent all the time thinking about, again, the audience and what am I going to tell that audience to compel them to take the actions and or agree with my position, which is why I'm presenting. I'm giving them my opinion and my position on something, and how am I drawing them to that same conclusion or that same motivation that I have to take action in a certain way. And that, I mean, there's no way around that. Do you have
an example? Do you have an example of where you've been through that process and kind of what you thought for yourself? Like, did you brainstorm a list? Give me an example of something so that maybe folks could kind of relate to that.
Sure. Well, I mean, you mentioned pitch decks. I think pitch decks are classic, and we're we're always talking to financiers, and the whole notion that a pitch is the classic, right? Because at the end you're expecting them, you're wanting them to buy something, and this is true for marketers too, right? It's the same thing. It's a pitch of some nature, so it doesn't even have to be a financial pitch. What you're trying to do is you're trying to understand the position of the audience. So I'm looking at, so if it is, let's use a marketing example. If I'm trying to compel someone to be interested in my product, Beautiful AI, well, what am I trying to get across to them? I'm trying to tell this audience, who is a business audience that, creates presentations to tell their own stories. So I'm thinking about them in my head, and my next thought is I want them to understand that they can save time, that they can be better. So now how am I going to do that? Well, that's now up to visuals, but the story I'm trying to tell them is that, it's the classic storytelling thing. It's like there's this world today where, you live in PowerPoint, and it takes a lot of time to create stuff, and you're forced to split your time between storytelling and graphic design. So that's like the world we are now. And then you contrast that with the utopian vision. I mean, again, this is classic storytelling arts, that now imagine a world where the machine did all the design for you, and you only needed to decide what you wanted to convince people of. I mean, so it's that journey, and again, you see this talked about in a lot of the books on effective presentations and storytelling, is about creating this journey, and then you're presenting data points that are relevant and salient. And again, not a data dump. You're picking things to show that, like, whereas something that once took 20 minutes, now it takes 2 minutes. So you can do, time value of money or whatever, because you feel that that's what's important to your audience. And you're helping them follow these story points to lead them to the conclusion of, as a marketer, what you want them to do is say, I should check out this product. I should take a look, because the data shows that this is relevant to me and I stand to gain and benefit from it. So it's that same logic where you present data, but you put an emotional framework around it that connects with your audience and bring them on the journey with you to the end, where they should be in the same place as you and have the same feelings and want to take the action that you hope they do.
And I don't want to keep shamelessly bringing it back to our product, but when you eliminate the pain of having to actually implement all of these different ideas and these ways to represent the arc and the parts of your story, like our tool lets you do, it becomes super freeing to really experiment and play with that. We've had people who, when they first used the product, they were a little bit sort of like, I'm not sure what to do, and then realized that, we give you this library of hundreds of templates. I mean, it's dozens of templates at this point, but there will be hundreds. And what they'll do is they'll just open it up and they'll sort of peruse through and sort of say, oh, well, this looks cool. This is a way I could represent my data. And it's just so quick. I mean, the best example I can give is when I was pitching to raise money for this product, meeting with venture capitalists, I actually just built the deck in the meeting. I mean, that's how easy it was. So I would literally sit there, start from scratch, build a presentation. I had the story in my head. I thought through what I wanted to say, but the execution was so easy that I could actually do it live.
Wow. And, and I think that Lou and I were talking about this the last time we chatted face to face. And one of the comments I have, and I guess you'll appreciate this, Mitch, is that there are templates, and then you can even look at beautiful designs. Like, you can look at beautiful templates and beautiful designs, and you can say, I'm going to recreate this. I can tell you, because I just went through a rebrand. And the designer gave me beautiful stuff, but they weren't in Canva, which is where I do my images.
Right.
And then when I had to customize that template, I'm like, I didn't hardly touch it. Suddenly it's not as cool.
Yeah,
because I mean, not design is hard, and the reality is, most likely you're not a designer. You're a marketing expert. You're an HR manager. You're a CEO. You're a product manager. You've got your core competency. You've got the thing that you're great at. why are you being given this tool that sort of says, hey, do design? I mean, the delta between PowerPoint and Photoshop is almost non-existent. I mean, these are professional design tools that, it takes a lot of work and a lot of effort to do those things. And so you get this stuff, these templates exactly that, or these pre-existing slides, and they're very brittle. They're hard to manipulate and make changes without things falling apart. And the fancier they are, the harder they are to do that too.
No doubt. I think I was asking Lou before, I'm like, what is this magic that happens? And because like I said, when I'm messing around with my images, it doesn't take much. It could be off by just like a fraction of a hair, right? Yeah. So if I change the date from February 5th to February 26th, like it seems like the whole design just suddenly doesn't look right.
Well, and kudos for recognizing that. I mean, that's the sort of the bane of the view of a designer looking at non-designers' work is it's hard to see those details and things like spacing and kerning and leading and tracking and how much white space there should be versus how much should be filled in and what colors to use. These are hard things to figure out. And that's
they make the template perfect. Yeah. For one thing, and it's all lined up and it's all perfect. I'm like, wait a minute, this particular logo is like this, but my logo today is like this. So
exactly. Yeah, and that's why this product has been the hardest thing I've ever done from a technical standpoint, because it's actually really easy to give you a blank canvas and say, do whatever you want. It's your problem. Whenever I look at a product these days, especially that comes out in the presentation space, my litmus test is I open it up and I immediately drag stuff around and see if I can make something ugly. And it's easy, and that to me says that, this is not a tool for non-designers. This is a tool for people who want to do design. And we call this democratizing design.
This was my next question, right? Because clearly, you give me if you need something ugly, by all means, I am your woman. I can do it. I can do it. But I did want to ask you about this democratizing design. What does that mean? How does that work? What brought it up?
It means that design should not be something that can only be done by people who have design training. That at the end of the day, I mean, there's a lot of different resources for creating presentations. I mean, there are firms whose job it is to create presentations. You can call up Nancy Duarte and she will build a presentation for you. But you don't always have the time or the resources to do that. And we wanted to basically put good design into the hands of everyone, just like Canva does. Their focus is a little bit different than ours, but it's a similar idea that, you can use these tools and create effective stuff very easily and very quickly. And I don't want to make it sound like it's all about design. I mean, design is really important. To me, it's always been the gravy of this product. The real benefit is the speed and the ability to spend your time focusing on crafting your story than you are spending your time worrying about aligning boxes and picking fonts and lining stuff up. What comes out the other end is this beautiful presentation that looks great and is fully animated and all the animation is done for you and hopefully does a better job communicating your story than you could have done on your own with a tool like PowerPoint. And that's what we're shooting for.
So what are some of the applications? I know I have, in all of, I think, my week or so of using, actually a little bit longer, I have stretched your platform to its limit. I've been a pain in your tech people's side because, you launch something and someone is going to find some way to ask you to do more somehow. Because it's like, oh, I can do this, but can I do this? Right? So what are some of the more interesting applications that you've seen? I've done my media kit. The other one that I did was actually I had done some in-depth interviews for a client of mine. And usually those come off as a story. And that's what it was wonderful to use Beautiful AI because I knew what the story was. When I do that work, the end result is a story that I want to tell with recommendations at the end, right? What are some other applications that you've seen that companies have used in different industries, and kind of give folks some ideas of what ways that they could be using this?
I'll give you one, and then Lou can give some. The best one I've seen is my 8-year-old son, who has never used PowerPoint, created the best presentation on poop that you've ever seen in 15 minutes. And it looked like a professional designer had built this presentation, and he just immediately kind of, so it's really good for that.
Are you sharing this on social?
I don't. I didn't keep it. It was a little bit early. We had a similar experience where one of my venture capitalists, a guy.
I want to see it.
Yeah, his daughter created a presentation on their trip to Tahoe, and again, looked gorgeous. And this is an 8-year-old girl who's never used PowerPoint before, and creating great output. If it's that easy for these kids to do it, then imagine when somebody who's actually got a real story to tell uses it.
Yeah, and we've seen people create infographics with the cool charts and visualizations. We've seen a lot of folks doing like kind of what you talked about doing for yourself, your pitch deck, your media kit. We've seen a lot of that. So I mean, clearly the marketing stuff, it's really interesting because the marketing stuff, there's kind of two kinds of ends of the spectrum. Is small business, and then there's big business. Currently most big businesses have a rigorous design guide and a style guide that says how everything is supposed to look, and that's a little troublesome for us because we're obviously encoded our interpretation of what things should be, and so bringing that in is challenging. But you can set the colors and stuff. On the other end of the spectrum, though, small business individuals, they seem to really be resonating with the product, because the most challenging thing is to lacking design skills or the money to engage with designers. The fact that now they can create something that looks great and consistent with everything else they create, that's been one of the most exciting pieces of feedback for us, is that the small business people feel like they can transcend the size of their company and look fully professional and consistent across the board without having spent a lot of money on design like giant companies do. Internally
or externally. I mean, I like to think of the world as 3 types of presentations, or one way to divide it. There are keynotes, TED Talks, presentations in front of a large audience. There are sales decks, very heavily branded, sort of outward facing. And then there's everything else. There's the HR manager presenting their benefits package, the product manager doing the roadmap, the CEO doing the company update, marketing team talking about, what were last week's web, traffic looking like. Those are the places that we really find that this tool starts to shine, is because those are the throwaway decks, the decks that you can't really justify design resources or spending lots of time on, but there's still things that represent you as an individual, as a knowledge worker, and that you want to use as a tool to communicate effectively. And so we've seen people doing that whole range. We see pitches, we see external decks, but we also see a lot of these internal decks, and that's what we're really excited about.
I'll tell you what, scientists, I heard an interview on the radio that basically said, and my husband's a scientist, and I get it, right? Which is the question these folks were asking on the radio was, how many great innovations did we miss out on because scientists can't communicate their ideas? That was the premise of this entire conversation that was going on. And so how might a scientist, let's say, be able to use this? Because it's an internal presentation. I love it's not a throwaway deck, but it's a big deal. These are folks working with big ideas, maybe developers, scientists, technical folks, right? Who are knee deep in data.
I think it comes back to the core premises again, which is that, I've seen plenty of those published papers where, it's math formulas and charts and tables of data, because, in the world of science is a perfect example. I mean, you're not only, you feel not only compelled, but in order to be taken seriously and respected, you have to show all your work. You have to provide the ability for someone else to replicate your findings, to validate your work. So there's this kind of bifurcation of like, I know I have to deliver all my work out, but then when they go to a presentation, they don't stop and think about the audience being, mere human beings who can't handle a fire hose of data, all at once. And I think this sort of the byproduct of the way we talked about how a product like ours works, where it forces you to crystallize your ideas and come up with the nuggets. I think it's really valuable for people like that because, again, it separates out the raw data, which you can, again, provide in a paper or whatever, some kind of document which is delivered and they can read it and analyze it and come to their own conclusions. The presentation part of it, like you're saying, what you're talking about is like, how can they be more compelling and convincing? They have to crystallize the elements of their story down, knowing who their audience is to get them to take the action, right? It all comes back to the same thing.
It does. It does. So Mitch, as a designer, as someone who is like really done this work with this platform, how did you go about putting in the restrictions and back to this crystallizing your ideas? Like when you work with people who have ideas, I love Lou's example where I talk to the designer and these are the things I want to say, or I have these 17 bullet points that I want to get on one little teeny tiny slide, or like whatever. So Mitch, what are some of the ways that you have structured the platform so that, that you have the designer in your pocket, and then, do you know what I'm asking? So that you can kind of think it through.
Well, I spent a ridiculous amount of time looking at presentations. I've reviewed and analyzed just thousands and thousands of decks. Trying to, it's all about finding the common ground. Teasing out the rules and figuring out sort of the middle ground of where stuff needs to be. And that's actually the easy part. The hard part is the edges. The hard part is what happens if they type too much text? What happens if they add too many items? How do you respond to those things? And so, thinking through all of those, permutations that you'll see again and again and again. Like what happens if somebody wants to emphasize information, in a series, or what happens if somebody adds too many team members? Can I fit them? And where do I move text, or where do I allow you to put an extra image? It's always been this sort of lever or this dial between the full-on flexibleness of a tool like PowerPoint and the really just simpleness of a template, if you match that template, and finding some sort of place in the middle. And I mean, that's sort of the secret sauce. I can't give it all away, but
well, how did you teach? I'm still grooving on the 8-year-olds creating slides. And my question for you is what you just said here.
They said, "Hey, Dad, can we play with your product?" And I was sort of like, "Oh, okay." And it's not really. I mean, this was early on, and the next thing I knew, they just figured it out. I mean, that's the thing. This is not an authoring tool. We do not have tons of menus with millions of little details for you to pick. You're not going in there and saying, which font do I want, which font color, which font, leading, kerning, tracking, pixel size, font, outlines, border colors. You don't have to pick any of that stuff. It does it all for you. You just type. You just put your data in. You just, you pick a template and you say, that looks cool. And it's pretty intuitive. You drag things around, you reorder them. It sort of works the way you want it to work. And that itself took a lot of work.
What's your advice to someone? I think I'm going to plop over to Lou for the storytelling side of this. What's your advice to someone on how to start with a tool? Me, I don't read directions. I don't do anything. I'm like your 8-year-old. I'm like, can I do this? I don't know. Let's see. But what's your advice to someone? Because when they sit down, not just with beautiful AI, but with any new tool, that's out there, let's say I have a presentation and I want to play with beautiful AI. What would you tell me for me to be most successful?
Well, again, not to sound like a broken record, but I mean, really, the key is first and foremost, know the story you're trying to tell, and kind of have it in your head. I mean, even any of the books, the best practices on the stuff, you'll hear a lot of people advocate, write your points down on index cards or Post-its, and just write the one concept on it. You're not like trying to expose and organize it and sort of have that together. And how much you want to go through that process, is up to you and the complexity of your story. But certainly from our standpoint, with Beautiful AI, if you've got your story down, like Mitch said, like with what his experience with the pitch deck for investors, even with us, is like he knew the story. He was able to build the presentation on the fly as he's talking because he knew the story, and the tool allows you to, sort of, again, visualize those concepts and those intents and those story points very quickly. So, my recommendation to get the most out of it is have something you want to say and have it clearly in your head, and then you'll experience that fluidity. The people who have struggled the most with the product to date are the people that are trying to replicate something they've already got visually. That's been so they start asking, and we can tell these folks immediately because they're like, how do I add a text box? How do I move this from the left to right? They're thinking mechanically. They're thinking about, manipulating directly the underlying stuff. It's kind of the difference between being an artist or a photographer or being the director, right? The director says, I want a shot of the field and I want to pan across, right? They don't actually grab the camera and take the shot and pan across, right? Because that's what the cameraman does. So it's that difference. PowerPoint and other tools have forced people to become the master of all these low-level things. And it takes a little while just to
Let go.
Exactly. Back up. Just, again, be the director. Have your stories. Talk about how your story should flow and go.
Yeah, when it comes specifically to this tool, we've got this tour at the beginning that's sort of designed to try and communicate that idea to you. That is our biggest challenge, is that, if you walk into this expecting this to be another Keynote or PowerPoint or Google Slides, it's not. We are obviously competitive with those tools, but we're kind of not at the same time. There will always be a time when you want to be a designer, when you want to be creative, you want to author, and those blank canvas tools are awesome for that. But this is not for that. This is for when you don't want to be doing that. And if you just, like I said before, let go and let the tool do the work for you, you'll find it a very sort of liberating, easy experience where you can create really compelling presentations ridiculously fast.
That is so key. I think I should have called this entire thing "Get Your Story Straight," because that's what I'm getting. That's what I'm getting from this conversation. And I will be the advocate for sure for this idea. I had another guest on a previous chat that talked about Snapchat of all things, and creating a storyboard. And his thing was, don't just throw stuff up there. Take a moment and create a storyboard. Right. And I'm hearing the same message from you guys. And I think that's a, should I say, a mistake that so many of us make. We think that the tool will create the story. We think that and that's where ugly PowerPoint things come from. Because we're like, oh, here's this thing, I'll just use this.
The story is hard, and we do want to help you with the story, but stories are very personal, and stories are very domain specific, and design doesn't have to be. So we're not quite at democratizing the story yet, but we'll get there. I think that, ultimately that is what's most important. You can do a presentation without a PowerPoint. You can get up in front of people and you can tell them a story and be effective. And a presentation is a tool to help you and your audience sort of be grounded and give you better or more effective ways to communicate what you're saying. But the story has to come from you.
Right. It should be helping, not a crutch. Yeah. Right. And too many people use it as a crutch. And it's really gone wrong when they're like looking at the slides and reading the bullet points. Then that's like, you've really lost at that point.
One of the things as I was preparing some of the content for our chat today and for the blog post. It's funny that you mentioned this director, be the director and craft the story type of thing. And then you mentioned these TED Talks, Mitch. And one of the things that I think is so powerful, and it takes the crutch away, where if you think of yourself as being on stage on a play, your slides are almost like your background, your backdrop, your scenery.
Yep.
They should trigger emotion. Because like when you go to a play, you've been to a play and they might just have a bed and like a curtain, or a couch and a curtain, or a table and two chairs. And the next thing you know, you are completely enrolled in what's happening. And those are the kinds of visuals that I came up with as I was, thinking about our content. And I have to say, you guys, I mean, I'm one of these people that's like too much text and do this and do that. And even for me, it's taken this long to shift my context.
Right. It's hard. I mean, it's hard because, again, it's the easy thing to do is just to type what you're going to say in a slide as a bunch of bullet points. That is the path of least resistance. This tool hopefully makes the path of least resistance not be that.
Yeah.
Just as easy to create visuals. And I don't want to say there's always a time in a presentation, to be emotional, to put up a beautiful picture with some quote on top of it. That's, a great path that you can take with Beautiful AI and other tools. But there's also always the time when you really need to show data. You need to show the visualization. And whether that's a chart with highlights or whether it's a comparison between, icons of percentage of men and women who followed some path, or whether it's, relative values being compared, or whether it's time or process or growth, or all these different sort of concepts, those are not necessarily represented by just one picture, and can be more effective if you've got sort of that visualization. And that's where the tool really sort of fleshes out over just sort of that. There was sort of a push in the last few years, like, oh, your slides should just be beautiful pictures with text on top of it. And you really can't build full-on presentations that way. I mean, you can build parts of them, but it can't be the whole thing.
So I'm going to end our chat today with the way I probably should have started it. So what is it that you guys know for sure about data visualization, storytelling, and where it's going in the next year or so?
Well, the thing we know for sure is the thing we've been talking about the whole time, that it's subordinate to the message you're trying to convey. It has to match up with your story, and it has to reinforce the story, and it shouldn't overwhelm the story, right? Because it's just the classic thing you see is too much information. People can't process the information. Unless it's like, again, some kind of deliberate data dump or briefing, the reality is the data is there to support your story, your thesis, which is why you're the one standing up there presenting and or pitching. And always keep that context in mind, that you're presenting to an audience, and it's a specific story that's intended to get that audience to do something specific, which then renders it effective.
And I think today more than ever, and maybe next year even more than today, design has become really essential. I mean, you've seen entire companies build their hallmark around good design. Apple, Target, Audi, I don't know, people are more cognizant and more aware of design than they've ever been in the past. You should benefit from that. I mean, you should look as good as your story does, and not be beholden to your design technical skills when communicating a message.
Awesome. Awesome. I can't think of a better way to end our session today. Thank you guys from Beautiful Slides. Big thank you to our folks over at Beautiful Slides who sponsored our chat today. Please head over to beautiful.ai, especially if you're on Chrome. It runs like a breeze. Check it out. If an 8-year-old can do it, you can do it too. Definitely go play with the platform. It is a lot of fun. But one word of advice, you got to step out of your context. This is not PowerPoint. Get your story straight first. And get out there, play with Beautiful AI. I want to see your slides. So if you've created a slideshow on Beautiful AI, Send it over with a hashtag Bizapalooza chat. Show us what you've done. It is free for now. So you definitely want to get yourself grandfathered in there on this awesome, awesome tool. Once again, I'm not going to turn you off, guys. We've got Mitch and Lou from Beautiful AI. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you. And I just want to say, it is free now. It will continue to be free. There will always be a free version, and anything that you do create in the product today will always remain free to you.
Yeah. And my closing remark is that, look, we know that there are, as many ways to do presentations and uses, as you can think of. And we'd love to hear your feedback. If you try the product out, please, reach out and let us know what's working for you and what's not. I mean, that's the most valuable thing for us as entrepreneurs, is to know what the users are thinking and what frustrations and limitations are.
Awesome. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.